More accusations against convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein as a new lawsuit lays out claims of hidden cameras and a seemingly cult-like atmosphere. We're breaking down the latest legal action with Adam Klasfeld, journalism fellow with Just Security. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Two Jeffrey Epstein accusers, Danielle Bensky and a woman identified only as Jane Doe number 3, have now filed a complaint against two of Epstein's employees. The women claim that without these two men, Epstein wouldn't have been able to operate his alleged sex trafficking venture. What a development that we're going to talk about right now. So Epstein, of course, is the former financier who died in his jail cell while awaiting federal sex trafficking charges. His partner, associate, girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, she was convicted of her own federal sex trafficking charges, currently serving a 20-year prison sentence. But the women here in this lawsuit claim that Jeffrey Epstein's personal lawyer, Darren Indyke, and accountant, Richard Kahn, helped the pedophile build the complex financial infrastructure that he needed to keep his secret operation going. In their lawsuit filed in Manhattan federal court, the women allege that Epstein had a surveillance room set up in his New York mansion, then hired people to keep tabs on both victims and guests. And we've heard allegations before that the billionaire was monitoring people at his properties and could even have tapes of liaisons between young girls and powerful people, although no such tapes have ever been publicly released. But this lawsuit also alleges that Epstein provided these survivors with cell phones and car services so that he could always keep track of them, keep tabs on where they were and what they were doing. The lawsuit openly asserts that Indyke and Kahn not only knew about the sick things that Epstein was doing to his victims, but also actively helped cover it up in exchange for huge sums of money. So there are several causes of action listed in this lawsuit, which the plaintiffs seem to want certified as a class action lawsuit, such as aiding and abetting and facilitating battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligence claims, participation in a sex trafficking venture in violation of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, or TVPA, obstruction of the enforcement of the TVPA, conspiracy to commit violations of the TVPA, Gender Motivated Violence Protection Act as defined by New York City Code. So there's a lot here. And in a statement, an attorney for these men, Daniel Weiner, said, quote, "Neither Mr. Indyke or Mr. Kahn has ever been found in any forum to have committed any misconduct, and they emphatically reject the allegations of wrongdoing contained in the complaint." So to talk all about this, and there's a lot more to talk about, let me bring in Adam Klasfeld, who is a journalism fellow at Just Security, somebody who knows the Epstein saga well, somebody who I used to work with here at Law&Crime. Adam, good to see you. Now, before you say anything, let me just preview for our audience what's going on here. Not only is Adam so generous with his time, but Adam is actually fighting through a jaw surgery. He had surgery on his jaw. He got into a little bit of an accident. He's okay. He might sound a little bit different for you over there, but really, Adam, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm so happy to see you're doing well.
Thank you very much for having me, Jesse.
Yeah, and I wish I could say keep your answers brief, but unfortunately, I have a lot of questions. So overall, what did you make of this lawsuit, and was this a surprise to you?
I wouldn't say that this is surprising. We have seen this kind of drip by drip of civil litigation in the Jeffrey Epstein saga for years. And these particular defendants were sued by the Virgin Islands government when all of that started happening, when the Virgin Islands government started targeting the estate, the Little St. James Island, to try to compensate the victims. These two men were the defendants in that case. And one can locate this new civil lawsuit as part of the drip by drip civil litigation that's a fallout in the broader picture of Jeffrey Epstein's finances. The Virgin Islands government had sued JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank, which we talked about on the show in the past. And those litigations have now reached settlements. And this is part of that fabric, talking to the executors of the estate, the people who are very well aware of Jeffrey Epstein's finances and how he handled the money, and how, according to the allegations in all of these lawsuits, were fully knowledgeable about what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. So one can see this lawsuit as a continuation of a years-long process.
And to put a point on that, yeah, J.P. Morgan, they settled for $290 million in that lawsuit that was brought against them, and Deutsche Bank paid $75 million to resolve a similar lawsuit. And the plaintiffs in this case, they're being repped by Boyes, Schiller, Flexner, and this law firm was actually the ones that previously had been part of that litigation against these banks. But talking about these defendants now, Mr. Indyke and Mr. Kahn, the lawsuit says that they helped Epstein set up his companies that was used to move money around in the sex trafficking operation. There is an allegation that they helped set up this fake same sex marriage scheme that allowed fellow assistants to help with their immigration status to immigrate. And the plaintiffs claim that Epstein paid for Mr. Indyke to attend law school and get his law license only so he'd be able to help Jeffrey Epstein facilitate his crimes. What do you make of this?
Well, again, these are allegations that have been swirling in the mix for a while, and they're now just coming into public attention more. When I mentioned a little earlier the Virgin Islands lawsuit against these two men, they called Mr. Indyke one of the indispensable captains, I believe was one of the quotes from that lawsuit, of Jeffrey Epstein's operation. There were allegations for a long time of this elaborate marriage fraud to keep the victims in Jeffrey Epstein's orbit. And as a matter of fact, one of the most explosive allegations of the lawsuit that caught the attention of headlines when this dropped, the idea that there was surveillance in his house, that's something we knew about around the time of Jeffrey Epstein's arrest on federal sex trafficking charges, when federal agents looked into his mansion. And some of that evidence came into play, as a matter of fact, during the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell.
But we still don't know what those tapes are or where those tapes are, what the content of those tapes are.
Right. And that's one of the big mysteries. I mean, look, how did this year start off? We had a big unsealing of years old sealed files that are finally coming into public view. And what is the tranche of documents and records that will likely never become public if they contain material that is whose release would victimize survivors? Like, we don't know what's in there, but that is one kind of hanging thread, one mystery that has not been unsealed, and that, by all accounts, federal prosecutors are in no rush to release or shed light on.
Talking about the Epstein saga and the survivors, it just made me think about how traumatic life can be, how tough it can be to overcome challenges. Well, that is where BetterHelp comes in. They're a great sponsor of ours here on Sidebar. Now, therapy, of course, can be a place to work through major life traumas, but it can also be a place for the challenges you face in all of your relationships, whether with friends, work, your significant other, anybody. Therapy is super helpful for learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It can be a place to just empower yourself, to be the best version of yourself. Now, BetterHelp is entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. That's what makes them so different. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire. You get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So if you visit betterhelp.com/sidebar today, you get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/sidebar. Again, we want to thank BetterHelp for sponsoring this episode of Sidebar. All right, let's get back into the Epstein saga. This lawsuit also states, quote, the defendants were well aware of the Epstein Enterprise's purposes, effects, and operations. Defendants were on Epstein's payroll for years, and they knowingly and intentionally personally benefited and received things of value from Epstein and his sex trafficking operation. Do we know how much they were paid? Do we know what they were receiving?
I don't know if we do. And one thing to put into perspective, and just going back to the basics of what this sex trafficking conspiracy was, and it's been said again and again, it's been just likened to a pyramid scheme of abuse, where in that function that entirely operated on this financial architecture, where Jeffrey Epstein would have to get large amounts of cash to pay one victim, to go find other victims to bring into Jeffrey Epstein's orbit. And this required, in the allegations of this and other lawsuits, major institutions and complicit individuals to look the other way. That if there was an unexplained transfer of cash, there was, I remember one allegation being that it was marked for jet fuel expenses in an absurd situation where there was absolutely no um, possibility for that this was being used for jet fuel at the time. That there were these ruses that should have caused red flags with banks and employees of Jeffrey Epstein that were actually used to keep the victims under his thumb in the accusations of this lawsuit.
And by the way, yeah, because Epstein, he paid millions of dollars to settle sexual abuse lawsuits, and the plaintiffs say that
Right.
the defendants, they knew why he was paying those settlements, that he was continuing to abuse the victims. And the lawsuit states, quote, if Epstein paid every victim with wire transfers or checks and left a documented money trail, his illegal sexual abuse and sex trafficking operation would have been easily uncovered. However, with access to unlimited amounts of cash procured by defendants, Epstein was able to commit the most egregious sexual crimes many times a day without leaving a paper trail. And these alleged victims, they also claim that when allegations of sex trafficking started to come around Epstein, and one of his banks had decided to drop him, Mr. Indyke allegedly conspired to get the bank to write a reference letter for the next banking institution and to falsely claim that there were no issues with Jeffrey Epstein's account. Have you heard about that one before?
That one was, in its detail and specificity, was a new one for me. I would say that, um, and again, a big picture view on this is that we saw before the lawsuits against J.P. Morgan and Deutsche Bank settled, we saw alarming messages between bank employees, some of them making wisecracks about, will Jeffrey Epstein appear with Miley Cyrus, who was then 16 years old?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they were cracking really dark jokes about this. So I think we might, if this lawsuit advances, who knows what other internal communications about what people knew and when will come to the fore.
Yeah, so Adam, this is what we know about the plaintiffs, by the way. So Danielle Bensky apparently was an aspiring ballerina in New York. In 2004 is when she first met Jeffrey Epstein. A woman she knew approached her about giving Epstein a massage in exchange for $300. She says that Epstein told her to take off her clothes, and then, I don't want to get too graphic here, but you can imagine what he did in front of her. And she says that she was called repeatedly to come back to the mansion and give him more massages. And she said, based on how wealthy Epstein seemed, coupled with the fact that everyone around him treated his behavior as normal, she just returned. She makes this incredible claim in the lawsuit that Epstein had threatened to cut off medical treatment for her mother, who was sick. She was fighting cancer, unless she kept her mouth shut, unless she stayed quiet, which is just an alarming allegation. I mean, she had confided in Epstein that her mother had a brain tumor. And then Bensky also says that she was regularly paid cash that was withdrawn from one of Epstein's accounts that Indyke was a signatory on. As far as Jane Doe number 3, our understanding is she lived in Europe. She was brought to New York by Epstein under the guise that he would help improve the quality of her life. She claims that Epstein sexually assaulted and raped her on multiple occasions. She was also allegedly provided with hush money payments. So you have two very important plaintiffs in this case with disturbing allegations. But again, it becomes a question if others will join this lawsuit or it will envelope into something bigger. What's your take on that?
Well, my first impression on that is that it sounds like so many other Jeffrey Epstein victims where he found a vulnerability he found a need. Again and again in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, we heard from victims who said that one was addicted to drugs, another one was 14 years old, and Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell met her at the site of a prestigious arts camp that they would help her. So what we see a kind of what we see here is a grooming independency, and targeting people who are vulnerable, who are suffering from grief or addiction, whatever have you. In this case, you outlined the circumstances that these two victims, but there's always this cycle of need and dependency that Jeffrey Epstein exploited in order to keep them there, and eventually with payments and the cycle of abuse.
Well, we will see if this lawsuit gets certified as a class action and others will join, and what it might turn into, whether it'll be settled. It's another development in the Jeffrey Epstein saga. Again, so much has happened post his death, so it's just incredible to see. Adam Klasfeld, thank you so much for coming on. I wish you a speedy recovery, although you sounded great to me. Just let everybody know real quick where they can find you and learn more of the reporting that you do, because it is excellent.
Oh, thank you very much, Jesse. You can find me. I'm a fellow at Just Security, so you can go to justsecurity.org. You can find me online on Twitter/X at Klasfeld Reports, and find me on this great podcast occasionally, talking to you about Jeffrey Epstein.
Got to get you on to talk about something else. But listen, Adam, great seeing you. We'll talk soon.
Talk soon. Thank you.
All right, everybody, that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.